Galactic Council's ultimatum backfires as humans launch Terran fleet. You have one standard cycle to comply. Or face annihilation. The words echoed through the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, a vast dome of polished obsidian and shimmering starlight displays. The Council had convened to deliver an ultimatum to humanity: submission or extinction. Ambassador Elias Carter stood at the center of it all, utterly motionless. His suit was pristine, his expression unreadable. Across from him, the Vorten High Chancellor, a towering insectoid draped in ceremonial silks, clicked its mandibles in anticipation. Around them, hundreds of alien representatives watched with bated breath. Elias tilted his head slightly. "Let me get this straight," he said, voice calm. "You're giving humanity one cycle to disarm, dismantle our defenses, and submit to Council rule?" A ripple of unease moved through the chamber. The Tisicara delegate, a serpentine being with bioluminescent tendrils, hissed, "You misunderstand, human. This is not a negotiation. The Council has deemed your kind a threat. Your war fleets, your relentless expansion." The Raltari warlord, a brute with crystalline horns, slammed a fist against the table. "You have no choice." Elias let out a slow breath and smiled. And the entire room fell silent. Then he chuckled. Just once. A quiet, dangerous sound. "You know," he mused, adjusting his cufflink, "I was hoping you'd say that." A tremor ran through the chamber. The Council members stiffened as Elias reached into his pocket, retrieving a sleek data slate. With a flick of his wrist, he projected a live feed into the center of the chamber. And what they saw turned their blood to ice. Earth had already decided. A colossal fleet loomed in space. Not idle. Not preparing. Moving. Thousands of Terran warships, sleek, dark-hulled leviathans bristling with weapons, were already en route to Council space. Carriers the size of cities. Battlecruisers with enough firepower to shatter moons. Swarms of smaller frigates, predators in the void. And the worst part? The transmission was time-stamped. These ships had mobilized days ago. "You threatened to wipe us out," Elias continued, his voice casual. "But we don't do threats. We do decisions." The Vorten High Chancellor's mandibles quivered. This is an act of war." "No," Elias corrected. "This is our answer." The chamber erupted into chaos. Some species screamed for immediate retaliation, others whispered frantically to their aides. The Grulkar delegate, a race of cybernetic tacticians, was already calculating survival probabilities. And they didn't like the numbers. The firestorm begins. A priority transmission flared to life in the chamber. The Council's own long-range sensors had just confirmed it: humanity's fleet was in motion. The outer defense networks of the Council's core systems were already detecting incoming Terran signatures. This wasn't posturing. This wasn't a bluff. This was a war humanity had already started winning. Elias stepped forward, placing his hands on the polished obsidian table. His voice dropped to something lethal. "We didn't seek conflict," he said softly. "But when backed into a corner, humans don't kneel. We stand. And when we stand," his gaze swept the terrified faces before him, "we conquer." The klaxons of the Galactic Council blared across the star systems, warning of the unstoppable storm approaching. The struggle for survival, the Council's desperate counterattack. Rocket. Panic. The word didn't even begin to describe the chaos erupting within the Galactic Council chamber. Delegates screamed over one another, their voices an unintelligible cacophony of fear, rage, and desperation. The live transmission of the Terran fleet, a wall of destruction cutting through the void, had shattered whatever illusions of superiority they once held. The Vorten High Chancellor slammed a clawed fist onto the table. "This is an act of madness. We must deploy the Grand Armada at once." Across the table, Supreme Admiral Jukta of the Raltari Defense Corps bared his crystalline fangs. His species had fought countless wars, but even he looked shaken. "Deploy them where?" he growled. "The Terrans are already inside our defensive perimeter." A hush rippled through the chamber. They were already too late. The human response arrives. Ambassador Elias Carter remained exactly where he stood, hands still resting on the obsidian table, watching them with quiet amusement. Not a trace of fear. "We made our position clear," he said, his voice slicing through the noise like a blade. "You threatened us with annihilation. We chose to respond. You assumed we would beg." He leaned in slightly, eyes glinting. "You assumed wrong." A new transmission flared to life in the chamber. This time it wasn't just a live feed of the Terran fleet, it was an open communication link. The Supreme Commander of the Terran Armada had entered the conversation. You want war? Fine. The holographic display flickered before materializing into the figure of Grand Admiral Naomi Kasparov, humanity's supreme military leader. Her uniform was crisp, her silver hair immaculately tied back, but it was the look in her eyes that sent fear slithering through the council chamber. A calm, practiced, calculating stare, the look of someone who had already decided how this war would end. I suggest you listen carefully, she said, voice cold as deep space. The entire chamber froze. Your fleets are scrambled, your defenses compromised, your chain of command fractured, Kasparov continued. In other words, you are not prepared. A map flickered into view. Council space. Red markers began blinking rapidly, one by one, indicating human fleets exiting slipspace within key systems. The TCH-Kara delegate recoiled. That's. Kasparov didn't let them finish. We have already begun securing your strategic choke points. Your trade lanes? Ours. Your outposts? Cut off. The moment your ships mobilize, we will be waiting. Silence. Utter, paralyzing silence. Elias took that moment to step in. You wanted to strong-arm us into submission, he said, shaking his head. And now you have only two choices, negotiate or watch the Terran armada break apart your empire piece by piece. He smiled. One system at a time. The council's desperate response. For a full 10 seconds nobody spoke. Then the Vorten High Chancellor let out a sharp, clicking breath. We will not be bullied, he hissed, though the shake in his mandibles betrayed his fear. Admiral Jukta clenched his fists. If it is war you want, we will give it to you. Elias tilted his head slightly. Oh. Kasparov simply folded her arms. And that's when the first system fell. The first strike, the fall of Tarvan 9. An urgent warning blared from the Council's emergency network. Warning, priority alert warning. Terran forces have breached Tarvan 9's defense grid. Council garrison destroyed. System lost. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Tarvan 9 was a heavily fortified world, a central hub for Council military logistics. And it had fallen. Instantly. Elias watched as pure, unfiltered dread settled over the room. The Grulkar delegate, a cybernetic tactician, spoke in a low, haunted whisper. This isn't possible. Another alert screamed across the chamber. Warning, priority alert warning. Terran fleet detected at Juxery Prime. Orbital supremacy imminent. Their war had begun. And humanity had struck first. The unthinkable decision. The council leaders turned to one another, realizing the truth. Their fleets wouldn't mobilize in time. Their defenses were not ready. And humanity had predicted this. The Vorten High Chancellor's voice cracked. We must convene an emergency war council. At once. Elias exhaled slowly. You can do that, he said, adjusting his sleeve, but I'd strongly recommend a different approach. Kasparov leaned forward slightly. Surrender. The room recoiled in shock. The Supreme Admiral of the Raltari let out a furious snarl. Never. Elias simply grinned. I thought you might say that, he said. He tapped his earpiece. Let's see how that conviction holds up after the next fleet falls. The countdown to humanity's dominance had begun. The Council must decide, fight an impossible war or surrender before it's too late. The ultimate challenge, humanity's greatest gamble. The chamber plunged into a frozen silence. Not a single council delegate spoke. Not the Vorten High Chancellor, who just moments ago had been bellowing for war. Not Supreme Admiral Jukta, whose crystalline fists had once promised the might of the Raltari fleets. Not the Grulkar cybernetic tactician, whose species had waged war for millennia. Because they had all just realized the same thing. The moment Tarvan 9 fell, the war was no longer theoretical. It was real. It was happening. And they were already losing. The bluff that wasn't a bluff. Your move, Elias said, his voice deceptively light. He adjusted his cuff as if completely at ease. As if the fate of the Galactic Council wasn't crumbling before him. Across the room, Supreme Admiral Jukta wasn't fooled. His species was forged in the fires of battle, their instincts honed over centuries of war. He saw through the games, through the misdirection. But it didn't matter. This wasn't a bluff. He turned to the holographic war table and stared at the truth. Red markers were blinking all over the map, spreading like wildfire. The Terran fleet hadn't just breached Tarvan 9. They had already begun Phase 2. And now new alerts were flaring up. Warning, priority alert warning. Juxery Prime has fallen. Terran strike group establishing orbital control. Warning, priority alert warning. Terran warships spotted in the Azrian Nebula. Potential attack on core worlds. Jekta clenched his jaw. They're advancing too fast, he muttered, his voice lower now. His mind raced through strategies, but he couldn't see a path out. The Vorten High Chancellor, once boiling with rage, had gone deathly still. His mandibles twitched as he realized the trap. Humanity hadn't just come to show strength. They had come to end this war before it even began. The last council stand. The Terrans cannot possibly hold all these positions, the TCHKara delegate snapped, forcing bravado into his voice. They are spreading themselves too thin. Elias arched an eyebrow. Are we? A new transmission crackled through the chamber's speakers. The cold, unwavering voice of Grand Admiral Naomi Kasparov. Phase 3 is in motion. Commence the blockade. A new marker lit up the holographic map. The Sol Defense Network, humanity's home system defenses, was now shifting. It was no longer merely a defensive perimeter. It was becoming a noose. New alarms erupted. Warning, priority alert, warning. Humanity has initiated full blockade of Council core systems. All trade routes cut off. Gasps spread through the chamber. Blockade? No species had ever attempted such an audacious strategy before, not against an empire as vast as the Galactic Council. Yet here it was, happening in real time. A new live transmission appeared. A convoy of Council freighters trying to evacuate from the Outer Rim, only to be met by a human battle group. A cold, mechanical voice echoed through the chamber. Council ships, you have entered restricted space. Your engines have been remotely disabled. Power down and prepare to be boarded. The feed cut. The message was clear. Humanity wasn't just attacking. They were strangling the Galactic Council's ability to fight. The desperation move. This is an outrage, one of the reptilian delegates roared, slamming his fists on the table. We cannot allow ourselves to be humiliated like this. We must rally our remaining fleets and strike back. And lose everything? The Vorten High Chancellor's voice cut through the room like a blade. The delegate flinched. The High Chancellor's mandibles twitched furiously. Every instinct screamed at him to fight, to retaliate. But he had just witnessed the impossible. They had underestimated the humans. Again. And now, his empire stood on the precipice of destruction. His claws dug into the obsidian table. How many warships do we have ready to counterattack? Silence. Then, Supreme Admiral Jekta's voice, hollow. At most, 30% of our fleet remains combat ready. The silence that followed was deafening. The Council's entire war doctrine had been built around slow, overwhelming force. Their fleets weren't positioned for rapid response warfare. But humanity? Humanity fought wars like a scalpel. And right now the Council was bleeding. The turning point. Ambassador Elias Carter finally spoke again, calm, measured, in control. This is your last opportunity, he said, his voice cutting through the room like steel. Accept a ceasefire and negotiate, or watch your empire collapse before your eyes. Kasparov's holographic form flickered. You have 1 hour to decide, she said flatly. If you choose war, then prepare for extinction. The chamber erupted into chaos. For the first time in history, the Galactic Council faced a choice they had never expected. Negotiate with the species they had once deemed insignificant, or be annihilated. And the worst part? They knew they were out of time. With only 1 hour left, the Council must decide, fight an impossible war or surrender before it's too late. The resolution and humanity's final triumph. Rocket. The Galactic Council chamber had never known silence like this. A silence born not from order nor respect, but fear. The Council's greatest warlords, its mightiest empires, its most unshakable rulers sat frozen in place. Because the unthinkable had happened. Humanity had backed them into a corner. And now the clock was ticking. The breaking point. Admiral Jekta's crystalline fingers twitched over the war console. His mind was a battlefield of calculations, simulations, desperate tactics. But none led to victory. His fleet was crippled. The outer colonies were already falling. Supply lines severed. The Terran blockade? Unbreakable. And the worst part? This war had started with an ultimatum against the humans. Now they were the ones giving the ultimatum. Humanity's final move. A soft chime echoed. The chamber's war table flickered, revealing Grand Admiral Naomi Kasparov. Her sharp, piercing eyes scanned the room. Behind her, a warship's command deck pulsed with controlled chaos. Officers relaying orders, tactical screens flashing with the slow, systematic collapse of the Council's defenses. She exhaled. Then she spoke. Your time is up. The words sent a ripple through the chamber. Delegates flinched. Some turned to each other, whispering in hushed, frantic tones. Kasparov continued, her voice calm, patient, dangerous. You have two options. She held up a single finger. Option 1, you surrender. Effective immediately. Unconditional ceasefire. Your fleet stand down. Your borders open to our terms. She raised a second finger. Option 2, we move to phase 4. No elaboration. No theatrics. Just a fact. But the chamber understood. Phase 1 had been Tarvin 9. A show of force. Phase 2 had been the lightning-fast advance. Phase 3 had been the blockade. Phase 4? Total annihilation. The council delegates weren't fools. They had studied human warfare. They had seen what happened when Terrans were cornered. Every time an enemy had forced them into an unwinnable position, they didn't just fight back. They erased the enemy's ability to ever fight again. A single, nervous voice broke the tension. What are your terms? The words came from Supreme Chancellor Ovar, his once proud, feathered crest drooping in resignation. Kasparov tilted her head slightly. For now, she said, folding her arms. A ceasefire. A full council-wide recognition of Sol's sovereignty. The immediate dissolution of the Human Containment Initiative. A murmur spread across the room. The initiative had been the Council's attempt to cage humanity, limiting their expansion, forcing their trade under strict oversight. It had been their way of keeping humanity under control. Now, it was gone. Kasparov's voice hardened. And one more thing. She leaned forward. You will never threaten us again. The room froze. Because beneath her words, beneath the carefully diplomatic tone, there was a warning. A final warning. Try this again and we won't stop at your fleets. We will come for your thrones. Your empires. Your species. Humanity had been patient. Humanity had endured their threats, their containment, their arrogance. But if the Council made one more move, it would be the last mistake they ever made. The final decision. The chamber erupted into chaos. This is madness, a reptilian warlord snarled. We cannot surrender to them. We are the Galactic Council. And yet they stand over our throats, Supreme Admiral Jekta muttered. One by one the Council delegates turned to their screens. To the war reports. They saw the truth. The battle was already lost. They could fight. They could launch one final, desperate strike. But humanity? They hadn't even started using their full strength. They had played this war like a game of chess. A precise, calculated dismantling of the Council's power. They could end it now without another shot fired. Or they could force humanity to show them what came after Phase 4. The Vorten High Chancellor's mandibles clicked. His gaze lingered on Elias Carter, the human diplomat who had orchestrated all of this. Once he had thought humanity arrogant. Now, he realized they had never been bluffing. I vote for surrender. Silence. Then another voice. I second the motion. One by one the council members fell in line. Until finally. The motion passes. The war is over. A chime echoed. The war table's flashing red alerts faded. The invasion markers vanished. A new message appeared. Warning status update. Galactic war terminated. Warning. The aftermath. Elias Carter watched as the council crumbled under its own realization. For centuries they had ruled unquestioned. Unchallenged. They had dictated the course of entire civilizations. And now, they had been humbled. He exhaled, adjusting his sleeves. Another crisis averted. Another lesson taught. Kasparov's voice crackled through his earpiece. Nice work, diplomat. He smirked. Likewise, Admiral. She chuckled. Orders. He glanced around the chamber, watching the once mighty rulers of the galaxy come to terms with their defeat. Hold position, he said. Let them stew for a bit. Pause. Then Kasparov's voice amused. Enjoying this a little too much, Carter? He grinned. Damn right I am. The unforgettable ending. As Elias turned to leave, the Vorten High Chancellor called out. Carter. Elias stopped. A long silence stretched between them. Then, slowly the alien leader spoke. This day will be remembered for centuries. Elias met his gaze. Good. Pause. Then a slow nod. Because both of them knew the truth. This wasn't just the end of a war. This was a shift in history. And from this day forward, no one would ever underestimate humanity again. End rocket. Fire humanity was underestimated. Now the galaxy will never forget. What did you think of this legendary HFY moment? Drop a comment below. Backhand index pointing down. Speech balloon. Should humanity push even further or show mercy? Rocket want more high-stakes HFY stories? Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss one. Bell new epic HFY stories every week. Don't miss out.